My hands fumbled with the map. Every fiber of my being wanted me to stop. It was sheer madness. Even the faded, crumbling parchment felt like it was burning between my fingertips. I tried to reason with myself, paint a picture of a peaceful life back at the university, stacks of books, the comforting smell of aging paper, the murmured debates with colleagues who'd call me crazy for even considering this. But the call of the Obelisk of Tari wasn't something reason could compete with. Legend described it as a pulsating, shimmering orb, resting in the heart of a long-lost temple, whispering promises of limitless energy and the power to reshape the world. We'd scoffed at it, of course. My team of archaeologists, historians, linguists, we all knew better than to believe fanciful tales. But then came the fragment. A weathered scrap of text, tucked away in a neglected archive, a translation hinting not at magic, but at ancient technology so advanced, it might as well have been magic. It was maddening. The map was a mess, a jumble of sun-bleached ink and faded desert landmarks. Even our estimations put the temple somewhere deep within the Asheri wastes, a desolate stretch of sand known for its brutal storms and unforgiving temperatures. It was a foolish, potentially lethal venture, and my team knew it. That's why they were no longer at my side. A week ago, there'd been 5 of us. Now, there was just me. Not from any tragic accident. They'd seen the obsession glinting in my eyes, that reckless need to prove the impossible, and wisely retreated. I didn't blame them. Hell, a wiser part of me wanted to join them in their sensible retreat. But I couldn't. Sarah, Professor Wells had said, his voice thick with concern, you chase a phantom, a scholar's fever dream. At best, you'll find ruins and disappointment. At worst. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I'd stubbornly packed my gear, the high-tech sat phone, a desperate measure against the isolation, energy bars, water recycler, the lot. A wiser archaeologist would have taken an armed escort, at the very least. But I knew a large, conspicuous group would only increase the risks, both from the unforgiving desert and from others who might desire the obelisk for themselves. So, here I was, a lone figure on the edge of insanity, the old jeep groaning under the weight of supplies, and nothing but dust and the whispers of a dead civilization in front of me. The first few days were a blur of oppressive heat and a gnawing sense of unease. I fixed my eyes on the map, its cryptic lines my only lifeline to sanity in that merciless expanse. Each dune, each weathered rock formation, was scrutinized. I imagined the ancients who'd built the temple, their weathered hands raising those stones, their motives as mysterious as the power they supposedly harnessed. By the 4th day, my water reserves were starting to dwindle. The sat phone sputtered uselessly, unable to find a signal within this desolate cradle of sand and wind. I'd never felt the world to be so vast, so utterly uncaring. Was this how those ancient explorers felt, driven by a burning curiosity into the maw of the unknown? Perhaps that's what had separated the history makers from the footnotes, a kind of madness, a willingness to charge into the impossible. Then came the storm. It began as a rumble on the horizon, the blue sky darkening with impossible speed. At first, I was relieved, maybe it would bring rain, a chance to replenish my dwindling water supply. Hope, foolish as it was, flickered like a stubborn flame in my chest. That hope went cold with the first howling gust. The wind wasn't the gentle breath of the desert I knew. This possessed a bone-deep chill, a fury that made the jeep rock and groan. Visibility dropped in minutes, the world reduced to a swirl of choking sand. It battered against the jeep's flimsy metal, a chorus of 1,000 vengeful spirits. There was nothing for it but to wait it out. I curled up in the back, shielded as best I could by the supplies, trying to drown out the constant shriek piercing the thin metal. Every tremor of the jeep, every howl tearing through the night, painted a grim picture in my mind, the vehicle overturned, me left exposed and alone, dying a slow, agonizing demise under the unforgiving sun. Hours passed, or perhaps days. I lost track of time in the storm's oppressive embrace. My body throbbed in tandem with the jeep's rattling. Water was gone. The last energy bar felt like sawdust in my dry mouth. Panic clawed its way up my throat, a far more immediate, far more tangible threat than the obelisk and its fantastical promises. Just when I thought the onslaught couldn't get any worse, I heard it, a sound cutting through the wind's roar, a deep, resonant groan that sent shivers down my spine. The storm hadn't just driven me to the brink, it had stirred something else. When the sand finally settled, and a weak, one light painted the dunes, I ventured out. The jeep was half buried, its windshield webbed with cracks, but still functional. The air hung heavy and still, an eerie silence after the relentless assault. Yet something about that silence felt wrong, charged with the kind of energy that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. And there they were. 3 of them, rising from the sand as if the storm had birthed them. Hulking figures carved from the same bone-colored stone that littered the desert. The map. Those dotted lines around the supposed temple site, they hadn't been decorative. They were a warning. Golems. Guardians. Whatever name I put to them, one thing was sickeningly clear: they were massive, impossibly strong, and their hollow eyes burned with an eerie, emerald light. I froze, the realization crashing down on me with the force of an avalanche. This wasn't a quest driven by curiosity anymore. This was survival. My first instinct was to run, but my traitorous legs wouldn't obey. There was nowhere to hide in this flat expanse, and they were startlingly swift for creatures their size. The obelisk, the temple, all the scholarly ambition in the world faded into insignificance against the primal urge to live another hour, another minute. One of the golems moved, its stone limbs shifting with the unnatural fluidity of a serpent. It raised a massive fist, and I instinctively ducked. An explosion of sand echoed across the wasteland. The golem had struck the earth where I'd been moments before, leaving a crater that could have swallowed me whole. So this was it. I was going to become another weather-worn skeleton, another cautionary tale whispered in the hushed tones of academic circles. Sarah Ellis, the woman who charged headfirst into her own destruction, blinded by hubris. But even as that grim thought echoed in my head, something else stirred within me. It wasn't acceptance. It was fury, hot and righteous. I was damned if I'd die without a fight, without seeing just how deeply buried this so-called obelisk truly was. My fingers scrambled at my utility belt, landing on the high-intensity flare. A pathetic weapon against titans of stone, but it was the only sliver of hope I could cling to. I ignited it, the searing white light a beacon in the desolate grey landscape. Then I ran, not away, but in a desperate zigzag, leading the nearest golem on a wild chase across the dunes. My lungs burned, every step a battle against the heavy sand. But behind me, the golem lumbered with deceptive speed, shattering the desert silence with its booming steps. The flare in my hand sputtered, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the wasteland. How long could I keep this up? My legs ached, my throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper, and despair gnawed at me like a starving animal. Yet, as I stumbled and recovered, a plan began to coalesce in the panicked frenzy of my mind. It was risky, reckless, born of desperation, exactly the kind of thing Professor Wells would have called foolhardy. But there, with the ancient golem thundering at my heels, it seemed like the only option. The dune I'd been scrambling towards wasn't like the others. It had a jagged, almost deliberate shape, a ruined stairway peeking through the sand. The temple. I was getting close. Maybe too close. I risked a glance back. The golem was nearly upon me, its massive stone hand outstretched, fingers curled like talons. Time seemed to fragment and slow, imprinting the image on my mind with horrifying clarity: the pitted stone, the shimmering emerald eyes, the sheer scale of it. Then, a surge of adrenaline shot through me. I swerved sharply to the side, barely avoiding the crushing blow as the golem stumbled forward, carried by its own momentum. Seizing the opportunity, I made a mad dash for the dune and scrambled up its crumbling stone steps. The golem roared, a deep, primal sound that vibrated through my bones. It whirled on its heels, dislodging showers of sand, and began to lumber up the staircase after me. My heart threatened to explode from the effort, every breath a ragged gasp, but I couldn't stop. It was a race against time, a test of agility against brute force. The stairway was treacherous. Stones cracked and tumbled beneath my boots. More than once, I slipped, my fingers scrabbling frantically to regain my grip. Behind me, the golem advanced relentlessly, its massive form a terrifying shadow against the pale dawn sky. Reaching the summit, I staggered into what remained of the temple. Crumbling walls offered scant shelter, their broken arches framing the rising sun and the desolate landscape beyond. And in the center, sunk into a vast, circular chamber, was a sight that made me gasp. It couldn't be real. It defied everything I thought I knew about history, about science. Yet, there it was, the obelisk of Tari. No mere ornament, this was a device. It pulsed with a soft, hypnotic blue light, an ethereal sheen that flowed and shimmered over its surface. My archaeologist's heart forgot about the immediate danger, awestruck by the implications, by the proof that those ancient legends held a sliver of truth. My moment of wonder was brutally cut short. The lead golem breached the crumbling archway, the other two flanking it like grim sentinels. 3 pairs of glowing eyes locked onto me, the emerald light burning like a verdict. Now what? I was cornered, hopelessly outmatched. The flare in my hand had died out, leaving me unarmed and exposed. Should I try to bargain with them? But these weren't sentient beings, they were machines, guardians programmed to protect the obelisk at all costs. I searched the chamber frantically. There had to be something, a clue in the carvings that adorned the walls, a hidden mechanism, anything. As my eyes scanned the weathered stone, a flash of metal caught my attention, a chipped, tarnished sword embedded in a crack of the wall. A forgotten relic? Or perhaps, a desperate offering left by others who dared to venture here. The sword was as heavy as desperation in my hand. The blade, though chipped and blunted by time, glimmered faintly in the pulsating light of the obelisk. It was a paltry weapon, a toothpick against a giant, but it was the only thing I had left. My voice, hoarse and desperate, cracked the silence. "All right, you oversized hunks of rock, let's dance." I didn't know if they'd understand, but the defiant yell helped settle the tremors racking my body. A low, chilling rumble echoed through the chamber, a sound like boulders grinding against each other. The lead golem took a ponderous step forward, raising its immense fist. There was no more time for hesitation, for analyzing, for fear. I charged. It was, I realized, an act of magnificent stupidity. Yet, fueled by adrenaline and some primal corner of my soul that refused to surrender, I ran headlong towards the colossal figure, the sword held high. The first golem swung. It should have ended me right there, my meager body crushed beneath that stone fist. But I ducked, rolling at the last desperate moment as the blow crashed into the temple floor, shattering flagstones and sending a shockwave through my legs. The dust had barely settled when I scrambled to my feet and lunged again. I wasn't aiming to win. That wasn't even in the realm of possibility. My goal was far simpler, far more vital: distract them, by time. With surprising agility, I dodged another bone-jarring strike, the rusted sword slashing wildly at the golem's stony hide. It was like trying to hack into a mountainside, the impacts causing no real damage, but my frantic movements seemed to confuse the creature, slow its reactions. The other two golems joined the fray, their heavy footfalls shaking the very foundations of the temple. I was a whirlwind amidst the storm, weaving and dodging their crushing blows by a hair's breadth. Stone fists cratered the ground where I had been a heartbeat before. Chunks of debris rained down from the cracked walls. It was a miracle I was still alive. I slashed one golem across its broad stone torso, the sword sparking uselessly. Panic surged within me. This was an impossible battle. I couldn't keep this up forever. Every dodge, every parry exacted a toll on my body. My arms screamed, my legs were turning to lead. My breath rasped like a death rattle in my lungs. Then, I saw it. Not the victory I craved, but a glimmer of opportunity. In all the chaos, one of the golems had strayed too close to the obelisk chamber. The pulsing blue light shimmered across its massive figure, the energy playing strangely on its crude, etched eyes. The golem tilted its head, the emerald glow flickering within its eye sockets. For a split second, a heartbeat of hesitation, it seemed confused. That was all the opening I needed. In a final, adrenaline-fueled surge, I darted past the other sentinels, focused solely on the distracted golem. Leaping into the air, I thrust the chipped sword not at its body, but at its glowing eye. The blade struck true. I don't know if it pierced anything vital within that stone skull. But the impact, coupled with the obelisk's strange energy, seemed to short-circuit something. The emerald light flickered, sputtered, then winked out. The golem stopped. For one eternal moment it simply stood, unnaturally still. Then, with a groan that echoed through the very soul of the temple, it crumbled. Not in an epic explosion, but a silent disintegration. Before my astonished eyes, it collapsed back into the coarse sand that must have formed it. The silence echoed louder than any thunderclap. Had I won? My heart hammered like a panicked bird against my ribs, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The remaining two golems didn't so much as twitch, their own glowing eyes locked on their fallen comrade. They loomed over the pile of sand, unmoving, inscrutable. Fear and elation warred within me. A tiny part of my brain screamed at me to run, to take this unexpected reprieve and flee as fast as my battered body would carry me. But the obelisk of Tari pulsed its hypnotic blue light just a few strides away. I had crossed a desert, faced a mythical enemy, and was I truly going to give up with the prize almost within reach? My hands fumbled for a fresh flare. The strike, the spark, the flaring white light, the golems recoiled, their emerald eyes shrinking from the brightness. Emboldened, but still cautious, I inched closer to the obelisk chamber. The golems rumbled in protest, but they didn't advance. Their movement seemed sluggish, confused. It was as if, with their companion destroyed, they were incomplete, lacking a vital piece of their programming. Stepping over the sand pile that was once their sentinel brother, I descended into the obelisk's chamber. The smooth, glowing orb levitated just above an ancient stone pedestal. As I approached, it was as if the artifact recognized me, its ethereal light intensifying in welcome. I reached out a trembling hand. Logic whispered of traps, of energy fields turning my flesh and blood to ash. But my fingertips only met cool, impossibly smooth stone that thrummed with a power that filled me more with wonder than fear. With a final, hesitant touch, I grasped the obelisk, bracing for something. Light, power, destruction, anything. But what I felt instead was a deep, reverberating hum that flowed from the orb, through my hand, and into the very core of my being. For a suspended moment, time seemed to cease. Light flared, but it didn't blind. It filled me, saturated my vision until I couldn't differentiate between sight and something else, some deeper sense of the intricate workings of the universe. It was a fleeting glimpse, too immense to fully comprehend, but even that fragment was life-altering. When the light faded, and my overstimulated eyes adjusted, the world appeared subtly changed. I still held the obelisk, its glow somewhat diminished, but no less beautiful. The golems hadn't moved, but the hostility had seeped away from their forms. They were simply there, weathered guardians at rest. Had the obelisk accepted me? Or perhaps it had simply tested me, deemed me no threat to its existence. Questions swirled through my mind, questions I knew I couldn't answer that day or many days to follow. The implications of this ancient device, its energy source, its true purpose, those were riddles that could occupy a lifetime of study. But for that moment, with the obelisk of Tarry humming gently in my hands, I was no longer just Sarah Ellis, the driven, ambitious scholar. I was transformed. I was the keeper of a power as ancient as the desert itself, and the responsibilities that went with it settled over me with the comforting weight of history. The silence echoed louder than any thunderclap. Had I won? My heart hammered like a panicked bird against my ribs, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The remaining two golems didn't so much as twitch, their own glowing eyes locked on their fallen comrade. They loomed over the pile of sand, unmoving, inscrutable. Fear and elation warred within me. A tiny part of my brain screamed at me to run, to take this unexpected reprieve and flee as fast as my battered body would carry me. But the obelisk of Tarry pulsed its hypnotic blue light just a few strides away. I had crossed a desert, faced a mythical enemy, and was I truly going to give up with the prize almost within reach? My hands fumbled for a fresh flare. The strike, the spark, the flaring white light, the golems recoiled, their emerald eyes shrinking from the brightness. Emboldened, but still cautious, I inched closer to the obelisk chamber. The golems rumbled in protest, but they didn't advance. Their movement seemed sluggish, confused. It was as if, with their companion destroyed, they were incomplete, lacking a vital piece of their programming. Stepping over the sand pile that was once their sentinel brother, I descended into the obelisk's chamber. The smooth, glowing orb levitated just above an ancient stone pedestal. As I approached, it was as if the artifact recognized me, its ethereal light intensifying in welcome. I reached out a trembling hand. Logic whispered of traps, of energy fields turning my flesh and blood to ash. But my fingertips only met cool, impossibly smooth stone that thrummed with a power that filled me more with wonder than fear. With a final, hesitant touch, I grasped the obelisk, bracing for something. Light, power, destruction, anything. But what I felt instead was a deep, reverberating hum that flowed from the orb, through my hand, and into the very core of my being. For a suspended moment, time seemed to cease. Light flared, but it didn't blind. It filled me, saturated my vision until I couldn't differentiate between sight and something else, some deeper sense of the intricate workings of the universe. It was a fleeting glimpse, too immense to fully comprehend, but even that fragment was life-altering. When the light faded, and my overstimulated eyes adjusted, the world appeared subtly changed. I still held the obelisk, its glow somewhat diminished, but no less beautiful. The golems hadn't moved, but the hostility had seeped away from their forms. They were simply there, weathered guardians at rest. Had the obelisk accepted me? Or perhaps it had simply tested me, deemed me no threat to its existence. Questions swirled through my mind, questions I knew I couldn't answer that day or many days to follow. The implications of this ancient device, its energy source, its true purpose, those were riddles that could occupy a lifetime of study. But for that moment, with the obelisk of Tarry humming gently in my hands, I was no longer just Sarah Ellis, the driven, ambitious scholar. I was transformed. I was the keeper of a power as ancient as the desert itself, and the responsibilities that went with it settled over me with the comforting weight of history. This new life held a kind of thrilling duality. By day, I was the respected professor, delving into the past through traditional means. By night, I was a pioneer, a lone explorer on the frontier of a revolution greater than any I'd ever imagined. And as the obelisk slowly, tantalizingly revealed its secrets, I knew one thing for certain: I would walk this path, however dangerous, however lonely, forever bound to an ancient power that held the potential to reshape the very world I lived in. Yet, even as I adapted to this clandestine existence, a shadow fell over my work. Whispers reached my ears, murmurs of shadowy figures seeking fabled artifacts, rumors of expeditions funded by those less concerned with knowledge and more with unchecked power. The obelisk of Tari wasn't just a source of wonder, it was a prize, potentially a weapon in the wrong hands. And it seemed I might not be the only one who knew of its existence.